Classical U podcast listeners, I want to make sure everyone's aware of a promotional that we have going on with the coupon code Classical Christmas 2024. You can receive 2 months at 50% off. Put that in with your purchase of a monthly subscription on classicalu.com, and that will be running up through the new year. Classical Christmas 2024. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Classical U's podcast, for following us with our courses, training teachers, parents, school leaders on classicalu.com. On the podcast, we interview guests that are recording with us, leaders and authors that we're in conversation with related to how to run a great classroom, how to deliver the liberal arts, great books, classical languages to your students. We also have a webinar series, live learning events that is in collaboration with Scole Academy and Scole Communities. Encourage you to watch for those as well. Those are monthly, and we're delighted to have you. Thank you. Welcome to the Classical U podcast. I'm very excited for this special episode. It's a Christmas edition. We are trying to put out 2 episodes. We usually just do 1 a month, but for December with Christmas, with a very special guest, Dr. Matthew Milliner. I'm so excited to be talking about Mary, and we'll probably range, across a wide variety of topics. But let me introduce you briefly, and then love to have you share a little more about yourself, and ask any questions of me as we kind of tee up the subject. The Classical U podcast doesn't typically get into topics like Mariology, and but at the Christmas time, there's a little extra license, I think, among Christians of all traditions to consider.
She gets a month.
Yes, month. That's right. Everyone gives Mary a month. So.
And then off you go.
in certain traditions, that is pretty much the deal. So there's not a whole lot of concrete connection to the course selection and the catalog on classicalu.com. But
but there is. In the Middle Ages, Mary is presented as the master of all the liberal arts.
There you go.
So she's often depicted with a book for that reason. So she's the chief learner of the Christian tradition in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. And she does feature in one course explicitly that we have, Women in the Liberal Arts Tradition, appropriately, to what your point, as the master of the liberal arts, the lead learner, perhaps. Yeah. So I hope we circle back on that. But I have one lecture on Classical U. I'm, the director, and don't do much talking. But in my one lecture, I do talk a good bit about Mary, and it's within that course, Women in the Liberal Arts Tradition. And my lecture is on the mythic cosmos, and I do talk quite a bit about Mary in there. I'm just so excited to have you, Matt. I'll call you Matt, but you're Dr. Milliner, and your credentials are impressive and delightful, with delightful being even more important than impressive. But I just love reading about you. I've been a fan, and I'll share a little bit about my interaction with your material. But you're a professor of art history at Wheaton College and a PhD from Princeton's Department of Art and Archaeology, with a dissertation on the topic that we'll be talking about, The Virgin of the Passion, which became one of your 2 books, The Mother of the Lamb, the story of a global icon. So I'm sure there's a connection between the dissertation topic and the book there. Mm-hmm. And you've also written The Everlasting People, G.K. Chesterton and the First Nations. And actually our company, one of the co-founders of the company, our CEO, publisher Christopher Perrin, wrote his PhD thesis on G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, great.
At Westminster Seminary, of all places. So, at a Presbyterian seminary, writing about a great Catholic apologist. But I see a strong thread of the First Peoples and, indigenous peoples, and that is a strong thread within your thinking and writing as well, from what I'm seeing. And so I have not yet read. I've enjoyed The Mother of the Lamb, been through most of it more than once, but I will actually be picking up The Everlasting People as well. It looks fascinating for more than one reason. I think the first essay of yours that I read was the Tree of India in Comment magazine.
Oh, thanks for reading
You
that.
were making some reference to C.S. Lewis's charismatic student B. Griffiths, and to the idea of non-duality in the Vedic philosophical tradition, and what that might have to offer to all of us Western Christians with our fragmentation. I was just captivated from that first read, and have been reading a lot of you since then. It was icing on the cake as you linked to something that I had written with your essay at the Field Museum with Father Tilliard, and again in Comment magazine, and talking about kind of the origins of our cosmos, and was just great to hear that you had been blessed by something I wrote after I had been enjoying so much of your material. So, but we're here to talk about Mary, not our reading relationship and whatnot. But before we jump into our topic, any kind of opening comments, anything I missed in your introduction that you'd want to highlight, or questions about Classical U?
Yeah, just two things. One, first of all, Sedes Sapientiae, Throne of Wisdom. The University of Louvain has a Virgin Mary statue of her sitting on a seat, and then she becomes the seat as Christ sits upon her, as wisdom comes forth. And so, again, anyone who's interested in the classical education that goes back to the Middle Ages sees her at the center of it. I think that's really, we cannot exile her from that tradition. And secondly, even the fact that, Jesse, you just mentioned the beginning of the cosmos, we might think, well, let's put that aside. I'm not sure we can, because if Christ had always, if God in the Trinitarian revelation had always designed him, he always was planning to be incarnate. There was never a time where he was like, oh gosh, what happened? I think I'll become incarnate. No, always. The lamb slain from the foundation of the world. That implies that the flesh would have had to gestate in a womb. And so the thought of all of us, the predestined ones, and of course the thought of the Virgin Mary, was there before the Big Bang even happened. So again, we're in deep waters off from the get-go here as we think about.
Well, I knew this was a risk, asking to have a conversation with you, but this is beautiful. I fully agree. Obviously, to pursue the classical liberal arts tradition of education, you have to, as a Christian, I mean, you absolutely have to recognize that Mary and the example that she sets for us, both in her own life, but also in the all of the stories and the meaning that accumulate and attach, to what she accomplished as the Mother of God. It becomes central to the whole Christian story.
Yes.
So, you're a champion of the Virgin, and you issue some great challenges in a few places. I wanted to circle in on that as we open the topic. You, in one place, I think, let's see, it's Everybody's Mother, an essay that you wrote. You said that you aim to playfully outdo Catholic and Orthodox Christians in their love for the Virgin. I just love that kind of playful, bantering challenge. And then in a number of other places, other essays, I've seen you sort of challenge people to join you, in reporting on pilgrimages, visits, and it's extraordinary how many places you have visited, and there's so many stories, even up to the till just today. It's you've lectured recently at University of Notre Dame, and your essay that you wrote with their Church Life Journal, Depth Mariology and Advent Pilgrimage to the Marian Grottos in the Midwest. It's just ongoing work, and you're.
Hey, thanks for finding that. That's great. Yeah, it keeps. I can't seem to stop, and one of the reasons, Jesse, is because Mary. If you've encountered the actual Mary, well, let's put it this way: if you encountered the actual John the Baptist, and he tells you, "Well, look, enough about Jesus. Let's get back to me." You haven't encountered the real John the Baptist, because he's always saying, I must decrease and he must increase. And I think that's the case with Mary as well. So by provoking people and challenging people to go to these Marian pilgrimage sites, I think what will happen is you'll find yourself growing closer to Christ as a result. It's a way of paying attention and honoring the manner in which he came into the world. He wasn't a phantasm. He wasn't an avatar. He wasn't a video projection from heaven that then once the resurrection happened, it just disappears. He actually has a body. And that necessarily entails a level of Marian respect of how that body came into being. And I really feel like we're at a point now where, sure, for a long time it was overdone, and I know that there are quarters of the Christian church today where the veneration of Mary does go overboard, and maybe she does replace Jesus. I just don't think that's our primary problem right now. That may have been the problem in the 16th century, but right now, our primary issue is she seems to have disappeared from the radar of so many people, especially Roman Catholics, because it's not me accusing them of that. It's Roman Catholics who themselves say, yes, since the Vatican II, Mary got demoted in a way, and she doesn't have a place anymore. And then when you have an issue with the place of women in the church, which causes much vexation for people, I feel like the obvious way to focus upon that is to say that this is the way God came into the world. You don't have Christianity without her. And the honoring place that she's always had in the Christian tradition is a testimony to, if you want a religion that is good for women, this is the one, which is why the pagan women were fleeing from Diana to the church, because there was more freedom, there was more representation that they had in the Christian ecclesia than amongst the pagan goddesses like Aphrodite, for whom they would have to give themselves in prostitution, which it actually happened in order to be a true devotee of, how would you like that? And of course you'd run from that tradition into a religion that honors women in a profound and serious way. Not that, as I often like to say, not that God is a mother, which is what the mother goddesses would suggest, but that God has one, which is the true mind-blowing Christian reality. And it just lapped all the insights of paganism. It just outdid them with a God who's more humble, who cares more for the poor, who gets gritty and messy in wombs and in stuff and in reality. Platonism didn't have that. It just didn't. There's nothing like that in Platonism. I love Platonism, but you have to have that added dimension of Christianity. And the Virgin Mary is shorthand for incarnation. That's what we talk about when we talk about the Virgin Mary. Yeah. We're honoring the fact that the Word became flesh. It's just a visual way of heeding that creedal statement.
Yeah. The flesh that Christ took, that God took, is Mary's flesh.
Yes.
And one of her names, many names, is, the director or the directress, the one who points to her son in so many icons. He's the center, or he's, where her hand is gesturing. And that's a point that, I moving from being a Presbyterian MK and pastor's kid in my own, kind of life journey, to being Orthodox Christian, I've asked a lot of these questions and love your passion and the challenge that you bring. As a teacher once, I organized a school event where we, at Christmas time, talked about Mary, and we invited all the parents. This was a Reformed, Protestant school. But I was teaching a world religions course and a senior theology class. And with those two classes, I organized this event and brought in a number of local pastors and priests, Roman Catholic priests, a couple of Orthodox priests, and several pastors from evangelical and Reformed Protestant churches in the area. As we were closing up the event, and I had asked an Orthodox priest to close us all with prayer, and we had an image up on the wall projected, maybe 8 feet tall on a auditorium wall, and he stood up to pray, and there were a lot of school parents there, and he started praying to the Theotokos, and I was just terrified. Instantly, I thought, I'm going to lose my job. I reached down and unplugged the projector. So this 8 foot tall kind of icon just disappeared, with a flash off the wall as he was praying before the icon an Orthodox priest. And that Orthodox priest is now my godfather. So
that is a great story.
I've laughed with him a few times about when I made the Theotokos disappear as he was, finishing a very standard, prayer in the Orthodox tradition, asking, Mary to intercede on our behalf, at the throne of God. There's just so many fun kind of personal connections and
you literally pulled the plug.
I pulled the plug on Mary.
The Virgin.
I pulled the plug on Mary, in the midst of a traditional Orthodox prayer by a priest who, was entirely nonplussed, wasn't upset or anything. And he's since many years since, become my godfather.
Well, and that's what we did with her at church historically. We pulled the plug. We
Yep.
said, oh no, don't look at her. And no wonder we have so much confusion in regard to gender. Because in some senses, the honored place that women have within the church for some sectors of Christendom has been removed. Jesse, I'm going to be sharing that story with my students. That's just too good not to share. But you mentioned you can't look at the face of Jesus without seeing something of her, right? Just like you can't look at me without seeing something of my mother. And I want to give you just that provoked memory of a line that I'd like to share with you. And this is from the Anglican tradition. John Keble, who wrote The Christian Year, one of the most best-selling books of poetry in the 19th century. And he was, unlike John Henry Newman, his younger mentee. Newman looked up to Keble as the model of sanctity. But Keble never became Roman Catholic, and Newman did. And so Keble publishes this poem called Mother Out of Sight, that's saying that's the problem. We pulled the plug, right? That she's off the projector in the Protestant tradition. And I want to just read you these 4 lines because it's exactly what you just said. Thenceforth, whom 1,000 worlds adore, he calls thee mother evermore. Angel nor saint his face may see, apart from what he took of thee. Is it just like perfect? Is that not? So even an angel who wants to go, I'm going to go, it's about, 9 a.m. and I'm going to go worship Jesus. Well, there he is. I can't look at him without seeing something of her. Is that just not? And not beautiful. To mention the entire messy genealogy that Matthew tells us about is showing up in his face as well. A limited, ethnically specific human face resembles mom. So no wonder she's honored. Isn't that just one? And that, again, that's from the Protestant tradition. This very same thing that you just said. So he was furtively trying to plug the projector back in and say, okay, we need her in this sector of the body of Christ as well. I tell this story too often, but I doubt any of your listeners have heard it, but kind of my equivalent to your projector story. I gave a talk on the Virgin Mary at an evangelical church here in town, Evangelical Free Church, and an 80-year-old man walks up to me afterwards and shakes me by the shoulders. And I'm like, oh no, I've ruined his worship. He's mad that I came here. He's saying, you brought idolatry into my church. And then he opened his mouth and he said, where has this been all my life? Why hasn't anyone talked about her? I mean, come on, right? That's the beautiful need. That's like, and so my hope is just to see this across the variety of church traditions. And it's again, and we joke about, okay, it's December 26th, Mary, off you go. No, this is a year-round phenomenon because last time I checked, the temptation to Gnosticism doesn't only happen in December. It happens year-round. And so we always need her around to remind us that the Word became flesh.
You're a heck of an apologist. This is amazing. I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm Orthodox and I don't have the guts to defend her in this way. It's beautiful. I'm tempted to go on telling story after story, but let me. I can't.
No one can top that pull the plug story. It's too good.
Well, I guess any topic that's a little bit controversial, challenging historically is going to come with endless number of good stories. But Mary is available to all Christian traditions, and this is a major point of your book and a lot of your work. And even before I became Orthodox, I was a student of church history. That's my little bit of technical training was at St. Andrews in Scotland with studying the Reformation. And it always amazed me how seriously reverent all of the reformers were toward Mary. And, that didn't kind of depart early on in the Reformation story. Calvin, Zwingli,
Absolutely.
Luther.
Yeah, Luther's last sermon was preached under an image of the Virgin Mary, and he had a lifelong devotion to her. Exactly.
Yeah, their devotion was very real, very meaningful, and they understood everything we're talking about as far as the fact that Mary is central. The reason for the incarnation, that you can't talk about the incarnation without exalting her, and that love for her is love for Christ. The two can't really be separated. She trains us in that. She's an exemplar in that. But one of the kind of,
we'll never love him more than she does, right?
Yeah.
It's just, and so that, and love is not a zero-sum game. And so she's like, you want me to show you how to do this? I know him really well. Let me show you how to love my son. I love it. That's just beautiful.
Her devotion, one of the two who stays through, the entire agony of the crucifixion. And that
I have something to learn from her. I think we all do. It's like, wow.
Yeah, when all others are fleeing. And one of the first to show up at after the resurrection with the myrrh-bearing women. I mean, she's there time and again. So that's
and you pulled the plug on her, Jesse. You did. I'm calling you out. No,
I did. Well, now you can't. I can't resist. A good friend of mine.
Spill it.
A good friend of mine. He's actually here. Works here with me. I won't name his name, but he also, journeyed into the Orthodox Church and had a lot of questions about Mary. And at one point, the archpriest in our little parish caught wind of the fact that he had a lot of concerns about kind of overdoing, zeal for Mary and that in the Orthodox tradition specifically. And he took this gentleman aside and he confronted him and he said, if someone said that you had some questions for me, exactly what do you have against the Virgin? And he says, got this deep voice and incredible presence, an older, priest later in life with a missionary in Alaska for years. So just, this kind of direct confrontation of what do you have against the Virgin? And, it's almost, some of it gets wrapped up with almost like a medieval chivalry,
right.
This sense of, Christ gives the Apostle John, who's probably very young, to her as a son, and the idea of him receiving a mother in her, and then in some sense all of us, receiving a mother alongside of the disciple whom Christ loved, if that's the right connection there in the
I
scriptures.
think it is. And I think that the mysterious disciple whom Jesus loved is all of us. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, the punchline of the Gospel of John. You're not voyeuristically looking at John believing. Yeah. He's trying to get you to believe. And in the same way, we're not voyeuristically looking at him receiving that maternal affection. We're supposed to receive it as well.
Yeah. And then, it's the kind of defense of a mother, that's maybe, draws out a little bit too much male, zeal, zeal at times.
It can be troublesome.
Yeah. You see some downsides to that, but I love all these kind of nuances and aspects that we're bringing. I want to circle back on your book, so The Mother of the Lamb, which I just love reading accounts. I mean, it's largely an account of Orthodox church history by a non-Orthodox. And as an Orthodox person, I actually really appreciate that because, when I'm reading someone outside of my own tradition on the history of tradition I've adopted, entered into, it's just especially challenging and enriching in a wide variety of ways. And there's a long list of these kind of particular examples, but I'll raise one very specific kind of question from within the text, and then maybe circle back out and try to state the thesis of your book and take a shot at that.
I'd love to hear this.
And then ask you to correct me and expand on that. But the particular insight, this is just one out of many that I could draw upon. You're talking about the iconographer, who first paints this global icon. Mm-hmm. And you're talking about the saint. Is it Neophytos? How's that pronounced?
Neophytos.
Neophytos.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Theodore Absevdis is the artist, and Neophytos is the recluse.
Yeah. So you're first introducing the story of the recluse, Neophytos, and at first I was a little chagrined, a little apprehensive as a sort of pious Orthodox Christian myself. Like, wow, you're setting him up. He starts trying to advocate for a festal feast day during his own lifetime. He starts, he has an icon commissioned of him flanked by angels, an icon of himself while he's alive, commissioned in his own, hermetic retreat there on the island of Cyprus. Yeah. It's not very Mary-like, right? She's the one who's always, staying behind, pointing to Christ, the same kind of thing you said about John the Baptist. I must decrease that he might increase. He's kind of tooting his own horn and setting himself up as a saint before he's dead, which is just bizarre. So I'm thinking to myself, is this really a fair representation of him? Is it over the top? And looking up some other material. But then you make a move as you fill out the picture, because you do really round out the picture of this saint. And you suggest that he may have given the iconographer kind of confidence to do some of the theological work in the form of iconography that he had.
I wonder if he did. Yeah.
And I just think that's a beautiful suggestion, kind of taking something that has some slightly scandalous aspects to it, and you gave it a positive spin and said, there's an ability to recognize your own kind of vocation and calling in Christ, and to, take a bold step. And the iconographer does some amazing work in representing Mariology and the theology of Mary for the world in the situation there where there's devastation and loss, but also boldly correcting some heresies. And you even have a little tally sheet of how many heresies go down before the iconographic work. But that kind of boldness. You wonder if he might have even seen that in his kind of mentor or patron there on the island.
Yeah. You've read this so closely, and that makes me so grateful, because a lot of people would miss that. And so I'll give you the response of telling you the background. So Neophytos is really a big deal on Cyprus. And he has been, Cyril Mango is a famous Byzantine art historian who died not too long ago, legendary figure in the field, just mocks Neophytos. And Galateriotu, and another scholar, kind of in that vein, like reduces him in a Freudian way. And it's very reductive reading. Mm-hmm. And they enjoy making fun of him and saying, look how egotistical this guy is. And so as I'm interacting in this field, I'm very aware of these accounts, and I'm dependent upon them. And I'm like, well, I'm obviously pushing against that, because I'm approaching this material as a Christian, and I'm not trying to deconstruct it, or let alone, I think that, the Freudian analysis of his dreams is pretty boring, right? I was just like, really? Is that all you got? It's two-dimensional. Mm-hmm. And so as I'm revving up to kind of push back against these other scholars, I felt like, okay, I can concede that Neophytos was a vainglorious jerk. And I actually titled the chapter, it's now called Depicting Divinization. It was originally titled Theater of Vainglory. And I just was saying how, indeed, because I'm like, as a Christian, I've got to give to the critiques here and there. I can't just steamroll over anyone who would be critical. Mm-hmm. And my good friend on Cyprus, Nicholas Bakirtsis, who's an extraordinary scholar, he works at the Cyprus Institute, he said, Matt, "You will not be welcome back on the island." It was so funny, and that's not why I changed it. But I realized he kind of was ribbing me. He's like, look into this. Like, are you taking some of this reductionism? And as I looked back, I realized, you know what? Have some mercy on the guy. He's like, hey, for goodness sakes, everyone on the planet takes 50 million selfies a year. He gets one shot and he's like, yeah, and I'm going to make myself. It's a hopeful prayer. It's not I attained holiness. It's may I attain holiness.
Yeah. He doesn't have a halo, I mean.
No, I think, and so that was, and he also is depicted with great humility. And so I realized that I think what was happening is I was projecting my own egotism onto Neophytos. I'm like, let him off the hook. And so anyway, it's fraternal correction of my Orthodox friends in Cyprus that helped me come to the conclusion, lest there would have been even more skeletons. And I'm so glad. I would have been so embarrassed if the book came. I guess I just got a little bolder, but like, you know what? Your reductionist takes on Neophytos are just really lame. I think he actually was a pretty interesting guy. And then you look into his sermons, not all of the sermons are translated. There's this enormous amount of them, and they are deep. They are profound.
Yeah, I love that.
I love Neophytos now.
No, I gathered that. It was clear you quote the sermons, and the theology is incredible. And there's a whole interesting dynamic. This is getting a little off into a side topic. You have all these stories of the Desert Fathers and such, and then you have these local kind of very small communities, an island where everybody knows everybody, and you're reading this stuff that at that point already would have been kind of legendary and exalted, the Desert Fathers, and you're trying to reenact it in a very small theater, right? A small town dynamics. But he's sort of honoring, all these great hagiographies by imitating them and acting them out in a theatrical kind of way.
It's not just formulaic.
Yeah,
it's right.
And he goes to the Holy Holy Land, right, and tries to find a hermit, and he can't. And it's like they're all gone. It's like all these heroes that I read about. Yeah. They don't exist in the real world.
I guess I'll have to do it.
I guess I'll have to go home and just do it myself. And so there's this kind of,
he pulls it off.
And he pulls it off. Yeah. There's vainglory mixed in with that. Saints aren't sinless. Obviously, they're the ones who confront their sin and recognize themselves as, the chief of sinners, like Paul.
Wouldn't it be right? And God deals with us in our sin and in our ambitions and in our envy and in our greed. He's like, I'm going to still work with these people.
Yeah. And God even, makes use of our some of our most idiotic and foolish, weaknesses and characteristics and whatnot, and makes good use out of them in some amazing way or another. So I loved how you did all of that, in that one little kind of biographical sketch of these two figures. But that's just one of many examples. Your story of the Crusades and going on, with the story of the icon. But to get to the thesis. My attempt to state the thesis of your book,
for before you go, for readers who are wondering what this has to do with the icon of the Virgin of the Passion, it is that the Neophytos depiction was the warm-up act for the first surviving instance by the same artist, I'm claiming, who painted the first surviving Virgin.
Yeah, in the same community there in Cyprus, right? Yeah, exactly. So Cyprus has just experienced the devastation of the Crusades, and the entire Byzantine world is experiencing devastation and loss. Yeah. And I think my attempt to state the thesis of your book would be this icon is born out of a very successful and powerful church that has had to face its own end and its own loss and demise.
Yes.
And there's a lesson there, that's an ongoing lesson. So Mary, not to detract from her glory as Christ's mother, and the blessedness, that the angel Gabriel himself proclaims. But not to detract from that. But Mary is one who can identify with the most the most downtrodden. I mean, her own Magnificat, obviously. She proclaims this herself. But that in loss and defeat, in vulnerability and suffering, she connects us to Christ,
Yeah.
sort of at the foot of the cross. And this icon captures sort of the whole scope of the gospel. And
Yeah.
you're trying to dig in and say, why is it? Because it's just statistically, right? Just kind of looking at it from a sort of art historian, technical or statistical analysis standpoint, it's astonishing in its how many times it's been replicated, in the devotion that it's inspired, in how far spread it is,
It's everywhere.
across all different Christian traditions, outside of the Christian, in any Christian traditions. It's just all over the place. And
I would challenge any listener, if you think you haven't seen this icon, just look for it. And if you happen to frequent religious spaces, and even sometimes non-religious spaces, you'll soon see this icon.
Mm-hmm. Can you describe it? As people may be, listening to this and not. So just give us a visual description.
So Mary's holding Jesus, and instead of these triumphal angels, who of course represent the angels on the Ark of the Covenant, right? Because the void, the vacancy in the Ark of the Covenant, because God is beyond depiction, has now been filled by this woman who enabled God to be truly take image form in the human form. And so instead of angels bearing their scepters, which was fine for a time, like, look at this, this happened, amazing. And sometimes those angels would be perceived triumphalistically, like, send the Virgin Mary icons into battle. This happened in Byzantine history, and it happens today, tragically enough. It's happening right now in some Orthodox quarters of the world, not to mention other religious traditions as well. Instead of the angels bearing the triumphal lance, they're bearing the cross, the spear, and the sponge. And so they are flanking, and so those scepters have been replaced with the cruciform, the images of that will lead to the cross. And so therefore Mary's upset. She's sad, she's tragic. She's been told her son's going to die by Simeon, who's right across the way in the first church where this is depicted. And Jesus, in some of the icons of the Virgin of the Passion, looks terrified. And in some, the original, he looks confident while his mother's getting nervous. And so they're trying to receive this news. So it's like, did you get the cancer diagnosis and did it not go well? Is God with you then? This is an image for people in that situation. Did you not get the promotion you were seeking and you're devastated? This is the image for that situation. And that explains why. Did you lose a child? This is the image for that situation. And that's when I first brought the image, my wife to the image in Cyprus. It is right after we had lost a child. And so looking at it was for us like, there was almost a sense of mockery as I was studying images of the happy virgin and child when we had lost one. And then I saw an image of, no, she knows what loss is. And by she, we must amplify that without reducing it. And by she, I mean the church, like Mary symbolizes the church. And so one of the reasons, for those listeners who are not fully tracking, one of the reasons that Jesse and I can speak so in such an amplified way about the Virgin Mary is because she represents the people of God. Just like the bride is the symbol in the Old Testament for the people of Israel. And so Mary in Revelation 12 in the New Testament is a symbol for the church. And so therefore Christianity can deal with suffering. It can deal with pain and sadness. And the pagan goddesses fled. If you were suffering, we're like, whoa, okay. Then it's not, the gods are not on their side. I'm bolting, says Artemis when she sees a dying person. Oh, I can't stand death, right? And Mary, I'm not saying she's a goddess. I'm saying she does what the goddesses couldn't do. She can endure and stay with people through that. So she becomes the symbol of your being able to endure with people who suffer. Not to mention have comfort when you're suffering yourself. You got it. That's a perfect summary. And I feel like it's an antidote to triumphalist Christianity, but we seem to really want that in all main branches of the Christian tradition. And so it's not surprising that this doesn't really catch on. It's not great news. It means it's the icon of like shattered dreams, the icon of broken hearts, the icon when you don't, it's the reverse of the prosperity gospel, is another way of putting it.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's ever. Well, I was about to say I don't think it's ever going to catch on, but it has.
Right.
I think the only reason it continues to catch on is because human suffering is a universal. It's a constant, and so you're going to need an icon like this. If you don't need it already, you'll need it soon.
Yeah. You referenced the lamb slain, before the foundation of the world. I mean, it's a characteristic of cosmic history,
right?
Death and suffering, and and
as you know so well, Origen says there is no suffering that isn't also God's suffering.
Yes. Yes.
Christian or not, like some people think like, oh, I've got to, arraign God and say, account for evil. And I get that. The book of Job was written, right? We have theodicy, but Origen's saying, are you kidding me? God is the chief sufferer. He's the one who is suffering with everyone who's suffering on the planet right now. He's suffering with them. And to be a Christian is to come to realize that being the case. Matthew 25. Whatsoever you've done to the least of these. Exactly.
Yeah, Mary's saying yes to allowing God to take on a human body is saying yes to God's being united to us in our condition, dying, suffering. So God's united to our suffering, united to our death by virtue of Mary's yes. And then she attends to that faithfully. She stays with her son through, the horrific loss of her own son.
And this is the lesson. It took 1,000 years and more for the Byzantine Empire to learn this lesson, and they learned it. And that lesson is encapsulated in this icon. And now we're hatching a bunch of triumphalist forms of Christianity that haven't learned that lesson yet, but they will.
Well, I'm a historian, and I'm always a little dubious of the claim that we learned that much from history.
That would assume we actually are paying attention. Exactly.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It doesn't mean we don't keep going back to the textbook because goodness knows we need it. So, Maria of Paris. It's interesting you mentioned in your own story the connection with the loss of a child. Maria of Paris lost 2 children. And her theology of Mary and her Mariology, I guess, is some of the most profound that I've read. But I'm thinking there's like this.
Skobstova, are you speaking?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, she is incredible.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, talk about a saint for our times. Wow, and just died in the concentration camps.
Yeah. I
mean, and I love how Ron Williams picks up on her in Looking East in Winter, one of his more recent books. There is so much in that saint. My goodness, she gets it.
She connects the image of God to this capacity of Mary to relate to this capacity of Mary to take on her own suffering as a part of receiving God on the one hand, and then the image of God is also Christ's capacity to take on the suffering of others.
Oh my gosh, that's deep.
Yeah, that's in the Ron
And then
Williams
she lives
book.
it. And then she lives it with her life. It's not just an academic theory.
Yeah. But I was just specifically thinking of the loss of children, you're in your own stories.
I didn't realize
she lost 2 children, was very much kind of left alone in the world. So that deep sense of connecting with Mary as someone who is there with the suffering, pointing the way to a God who suffers with us.
Well, I'll just say one quick thing about what you said, and then we'll do another question. But Kathy Kollwitz is a German artist, and she also lost 2 sons in World Wars I and II. And she gave us these haunting pietas of the agonized mother holding the child. And I got so frustrated when I read an fellow art historian who I respect, who said there's nothing reminiscent of Christian iconography in these images. And I'm like, no. Like you can wish that to be the case. But there is no way that Kollwitz, who's agonizing in that way, is not thinking of the Pietà and she mourns through her hands as she makes those sculptures. Absolutely. And that's the thing. So I just think, I mean, can you imagine going through that level of suffering in a secular milieu without any appeal to transcendence? I think that Kollwitz got there through the art, and it's necessarily Marian.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Well, I have two ideas. Maybe we can touch briefly on both of them, but one would just be, we've made the claim that this icon, the Virgin of the Passion, is ubiquitous. It's all over the place. You've said, if you think you haven't seen it, double check. You probably have. I'd be interested to have, just kind of a couple examples of just how widespread in places that we might not expect this icon to show up, where it does show up, and then very different. If we might just briefly survey Mary's presence in the New Testament. She, there's endless controversy because it's a limited number of passages, and it's been a polemical, battleground between particularly, Protestant Catholic polemics. But just a little bit of a survey. We've touched on a few examples of that, but I'm wondering if we might, so that the ubiquitous presence of the Virgin of the Passion icon in our world today, where is it showing up in your journeys and explorations, and you're attending to it in places we might not expect?
Sure. Let me answer in reverse. First, and this never really struck me until you spoke just now, but I feel like I've been around the track so many times in class about here's all the places where Mary is mentioned in the New Testament. It's not as many as in the Quran. Sometimes people say there's more about Mary in the Quran, which is, I guess, technically true if you're going on a word count. But as I think, actually, no. Because anytime you see Jesus, she had to be there first, right? So it's like, and so I think, yes, she might not explicitly show up, but there's this background presence every time the people of Israel that every time are mentioned. There's that deep resonance of every time the church is mentioned. There's that deep resonance. The Woman and the Hour, that wonderful book by Addison Hodges Hart, teases that out of the Gospel of John. And anytime wisdom is referenced, Proverbs 8 is referenced, and therefore there's that connection. So again, I'm starting to get, and then the where she does show up is also wonderful. But so that's one thing to keep in mind is that you, and then of course the Orthodox tradition would always say, like, why are you limiting yourself to the New Testament? The burning bush is the Virgin Mary. Come on, right? She gets pregnant, but she doesn't lose her virginity, right? That's what the burning bush signifies. And so the typological reading of the Old Testament all of a sudden means she shows up everywhere, the Ark of the Covenant that I just mentioned. So that would be my first response to the New Testament. It's like she's in the whole Bible, right? That's if you approach the Bible as a believer. And secondly, in regard to the ubiquity as her being all around our culture, and I mean specifically this icon you can see in all kinds of places. I end the book by her appearance, her cameo at the 2012 Olympics in London, where an Ethiopian Orthodox runner pulled this icon out of her jersey and held it up for the world to see, and more people saw that icon in that moment than were on the planet when the image was first painted.
Wow.
So which is kind of amazing. But on cyberspace, in 7-Eleven, I just saw her today. I was at a Guadalupe shrine nearby, and there was this massive woven icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help, the Catholic version of that. You might say, why is it so pervasive? Now, you'll certainly see it in Orthodox churches, because in the 19th century, Pope Pius IX told the Redemptorist order of priests who were stationed around the world to spread this icon around the world. And so it had a huge gust of wind to push it over the line, which is what enables her to be called, and I quote, respected art historians have said this is true, that the most popular icon in the world, the most popular icon in the world. That's how extraordinary the manifestation was. And I think, again, the reason is because of what we just discussed. And so if you look up Our Lady of Perpetual Help you put that into Google Maps wherever you live, you'll probably find there's an OLPH church near you, and there you can go see the image. Right here in Chicago, I live off Roosevelt Road, and when I got here, I learned, just finishing my dissertation, that there was something called the Miracle on Roosevelt Road, when an icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help at a church in the city saved the church from the Great Chicago Fire. And then again, when they were about to shut the church down, there was a fundraising miracle that they said, oh, the icon has performed a miracle again. And she's everywhere. So again, I don't want to steal the fun from the reader or from the listeners. You get the joy of kind of being on the hunt for her in one way or another. And then you can do what I do, which you can just sort of cheat and then just buy an icon of Our Lady Perpetual Help and put it in your home. And then you're like, oh, now I know there's a little shrine right here. So I think the kids need that, right? Kids need to see the gospel visually. It catechizes them, because you bet those phones are going to do it, and they want to do it. And the screens are doing it, and they want to do it. Well, you got to beat them to it. I don't care what your Christian tradition is. This is a reminder that God became flesh. Your kids need to see beauty. Christian beauty needs to hold the trophy of visual saturation in your household, lest the world steal their hearts in other ways.
Yeah, in such a visually oriented and visually saturated culture, with marketing and entertainment, just, how can we be how can we be iconoclastic as Christians?
Exactly, Jesse. And I want to say, to any Protestant friends who have reservations, like, I applaud your reservations, because it shows me that you're catechized, that Jesus comes first. So no one here, we're not disputing that. What I'm saying is, you should pick a fight with Netflix and their depictions of the Virgin Mary. You should pick a fight with The Chosen and say, wow, do I want that actor's image in my face every time I pray? But nobody fights with them and says, oh, you have an icon in your house. What do you mean? It is so tame in comparison to the stuff that we authorize, because it comes to us through the algorithms, the enchanted, slicked algorithms that are taking over our psyches. Like, icons are the brake pad. They are not the acceleration pad. That's why we need them like never before.
Yeah. And children do respond to them just astonishingly. I see that we have just parades of little children in our little parish, and they bring their stuffed animals, so you have lines of children coming through, at the beginning of service, and all their little stuffed animals are being held up,
That's
to venerate,
awesome.
as they venerate. And it's just beautiful. It's so human, and it is connected to the incarnation. Christ, God, takes on a body, enters our history, unites himself to us, and that is then the human image fully becomes the image of God, and images of humans, including God's mother, can be windows to God, and children get that. They just respond to it so beautifully. Well, let's wrap it up there, Matt. It's been such a pleasure and delight. Thank you very much for your time, and I commend your materials, your books, your essays to our listeners.
And thanks for such a thoughtful and close read, Jesse. I deeply appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. You've been listening to Classical U's podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We release podcast episodes once a month with our presenters. Please also check out our live learning events, webinars in collaboration with Scholé Academy and Scholé Communities.